Good afternoon and welcome to this potentially interesting session. And just very quickly, I don't know why this is in front of me, but I'll press buttons and see what happens. And just very quickly, I'm me, the president of Sarvotel, and most of you, I know most of you, and most of you may know me, that our firm is a global hotel development advisory firm. Let's keep it at that. But I'd like our very valuable panelists to quickly introduce themselves as well, and then we'll kick it off. The way we would like to run it is rather than having, as a moderator, giving time for people to have long monologues, we will try to make it as interactive as possible intra-panel and also with yourselves. There will be an option to write any questions, and they'll be picking it up along the way. Otherwise, at any time, you can interject as well. And if you don't, there will be certain periods where we will say, anybody wants to interject or have any questions or comments, let's kick it off and do some introductions. I'll still press some buttons here and see what happens while it's going on. Start with you.
Do I get a button?
There you go.
I do. Well, there you go. I'm Matt Luscombe. I am the Chief Commercial Officer for IHG here in Europe.
And I am Carlton Irvin. I represent Marriott's development interest across Europe. We are a fairly beefy team of about 16 developers across Europe.
Carmen Hoy. I'm responsible for our European operations for host hotels and resorts. We are one of the largest owners of hotels around the world. We work with the major brands like Marriott, Starwood, and we've recently dipped our toes into independent hotels and independently operated hotels as well.
So good afternoon, my name is Olivier Cohn. I'm the CEO for Best Western in France, overlooking obviously France, but also overlooking for Best Western North Africa, Algeria, mainly.
Now, the title, thank you very much for the introductions, but the title of the session is basically all-encompassing. You know, if you have a hotel, what hell happens afterwards? You know, who runs it, why, who distributes it, why? So there's a huge spectrum, so we'll try to focus it on. The title includes sort of keywords like white label, owner-operated, brand-operated, standalone. So there's all sorts of permutations there. But I'd like to kick off with one fundamental question, that today's distribution and consumer behavior model may suggest, and I'm going to start with you, Carlton, for a minute, may suggest that the very traditional branding as we know it in the chain hotellerie that started in the 60s, 70s in the US, may be under threat from a consumer's purchasing behavior perspective. And therefore, there's a need to adapt to that, and there's a need to address a little bit more unique versions of things rather than an all-encompassing brand identity. I'd like that discussion to start a little bit that way. What's your take on that? Why I started with you is you represent one of the mainstays of large traditional chain hotellerie brands, perhaps not Ritz-Carlton, but on the Marriott side.
Sure. So I'll take a stab at it. My view on that topic has changed. I used to think, you know, some people use the word sameness, and I think that's a little bit derogatory into what brands bring to the table. I prefer predictability, but not predictability necessarily of product, more predictability of service levels and amenities and sort of quality of experience. One of the ways that I think brands, certainly we have, and I can speak maybe for some of the other big brands, have adapted to the consumer's desire for more individualized experience, yet being embraced by a big brand, is through soft branding. And so in our case, that would include Autograph Collection. And we've gone, I think in 5 years, we've gone from 0 Autograph Collection hotels to 30. And I'll be careful not to make this an infomercial, but be responsive to your question, Omer. And so, you know, when you look at how brands have responded generally, we've responded with Autograph Collection, but other brands have responded with things like Curio in the case of Hilton, or Tribute in the case of Starwood. one I kept pronouncing the name of Radisson, and just recently the Unbound collection in the case of Hyatt. So that's a way that we're trying to enter into this more individualized experience for guests while maintaining our sort of brand integrity at the same time. We're trying to give owners a chance to sort of have their cakes and eat it too.
So, I mean, there's two ways to it. I mean, the number of births of sub-brands that are happening in the large chain systems either is responding to the fact that they're getting saturated in certain markets and they need to open up new space for the system to sort of circumvent the AOPs is one thing. Definitely being a little bit more contemporary and responding to current demand is the second. But is it third that, actually, my original question, that a brand like Marriott, or call it Intercontinental, under threat of the predictability? On the predictability, and therefore these sub-brands that are a little bit more individualistic in their formation is sort of a compensation for that within the system.
Well, so I'll maybe be crass in my answer to you. I think it's a response to a business need that the brands noticed, certainly Marriott noticed, that we weren't fulfilling. You know, just to give the group an example, and those of you who are hotel owners in here will be familiar with this. If you have a great hotel and a brand company like Marriott, or pick any of the big brands comes to your hotel, we're going to look at it for conversion to one of our main brands, and we're going to give you a long list of the things you have to do to your hotel to change it to make it appropriate for the brand in question. And we saw that this was happening again and again, and those changes wouldn't be economical for owners. But yet some of these hotels were great hotels, fantastic for individual hotels, but great hotels with the predictability of service level that I've been mentioning, or amenities. And so I think that the growth of these soft brands among the big brands was to try to accommodate that segment of the market, both with respect to owners, with respect to the customers, and then to fill a business need that wasn't being filled on the brand's behalf.
Matthew, what's your take on the sort of very traditionally established brand versus the new generation of brands that are under the same system?
Yeah, I think if you look back at why brands evolve in the first place in this industry or across any industry, I mean, what is brand fundamentally? A brand is fundamentally a promise. And in the 1950s, when hotel brands really started to emerge, the promise that was necessary to guests was just a very basic promise around guest experience. It was just fundamentally, is this a safe hotel? Is this a hotel where the room is clean? Does it have some basic kind of amenities and features? And that was the role, that was the promise that brands made back then. I think moving forward, several decades, of course, consumer needs have become more sophisticated. The industry has matured, and I think there has been a kind of a segmentation of those needs. And I think that's part of the reason why you see more sub-branding and so on, because we've become more sophisticated about meeting those needs. I think one of those particular needs, and one that's very fast growing, is the boutique space, where you have, by definition, individual or individualized properties, but still with kind of a common way of delivering against a promise. So delivering against incredible design, delivering against incredible inspired service, delivering against destination restaurants and bars. So features that you would expect in a boutique hotel, but by definition incarnated very differently, market by market. And that's the very exciting territory. So to jump into the brand advert, this week we're announcing the launch of Kimpton, our newest brand acquisition. Yeah, but the first Kimpton outside of North America will be in Amsterdam, here in Europe, and really that's trying to bring to life this kind of best of both worlds proposition, where you've got a product which is very, very tailored to the market, very, very tailored to those guest needs around a boutique experience, but then supported by the commercial might that an organisation like IHG or any of the big brand chains can bring to bear.
Yeah, get back to that one, because I have that pet question I shared with you, that whether boutique chain is an oxymoron, actually. Can a chain of boutiques make sense?
I looked the word up in preparation for this.
We'll get back. Carmen, from an investor's perspective, an owner's perspective, what's your take on the various models now in terms of plug and play, managed, self-sustaining? There are various ways now increasingly becoming an option for investors.
Absolutely.
Rather than going to a single model that used to be in the 80s or 90s.
Yeah, so but before I answer your question, I just wanted to chime in and offer a slightly different spin to both Carlton and
I knew
Matt's
that. I knew that.
comments.
Yes.
I do think that consumers have become a bit more sophisticated, but that's not to say that they weren't sophisticated before. I think now with technology, OTAs and the internet, consumers have more access to choice. And therefore, they can figure out what they really want and what they're really looking for in a hotel. And hotel companies, again, not that they're becoming wiser in terms of what brands they offer and trying to become everything to everybody, but I think they're becoming more sophisticated in tapping into how they can capitalize on the choice that the consumer wants and expects. So for us as owners, we see that as a good thing. The more choice for the consumers, more choice for us, because we can play with different models. And at the end of the day, what model we pick for any particular asset is highly dependent on location, market, what's in the competitive set already, and really what drives the value with a capital V.
Right. And in terms of models, though, as an owner, now you have a selection of models in front of you. And you're quite responsive to that in terms
Absolutely.
of picking and choosing models of how to operate a hotel and how to distribute it, how to connect it.
Absolutely. We don't operate hotels ourselves, so we always, as a U.S. REIT, we're prohibited because of our tax structure in the States. But we have a variety of models we can plug into. We depend on, when it's brand managed hotel, we depend on the brands and work closely with them to revenue manage and tap into the different channels they can plug into. Ideally maximizing their own distribution channel. But when it comes to independence, we really look closely at who are the market experts within any particular city or destination and tap into the resources that they have already in place to be able to maximize and drive the bottom line.
Good. I'll get back to you on the independent now. I mean, if an independently managed property will become an interest to you, but I'll get to that. Olivier, can you take this whole thing from another perspective in terms of whether you're seeing, in terms of investors and owners, turning into models that involve much more of a plug and play and distribution with the one party and a softer management on the other? Are you seeing an increase in this model? Or are you still very much serving the independent market, which is non-institutional investors?
Well, we do see a trend where, history-wise, we have been working with independent hoteliers for as long as we are on this market. But as we see, there's some kind of a concentration in the market, with owners concentrating, with asset managers coming to us. And in terms of hotels we are working with today, we've got more and more larger or mini groups scales with owners working with white label management companies. So there's a big shift in terms of the hotels we are working with and which we are partnering with, going from independent hoteliers, which is our core business and our historical business, now working with people which are real asset managers. So there's a shift for us too, because there's a shift in the market globally.
Yeah, we're seeing an interesting development from the financial world when you're looking at debt financing, whereas I don't know, maybe a decade ago, a lot of debt finance would not really look at a hotel project unless there was a very solid, proven, branded operator in place, or as a potential at least. And we've seen the shift over the decade, especially the last 5 years, that they are taking it very seriously when an entrepreneur or an investor comes up with a business model that actually brings in a curated number of components into the equation, whether it be an operator, could be white label, it could be self-created, and a system to plug in, and the right development people in place, etc. They're taking it much more seriously. I don't know if any of you share this trend, or have you been a part of it on the receiving end?
I do think there's value when it comes to sourcing capital and funding with major distribution systems, but at the end of the day, it goes to value. What model or branding or operator can afford to help you create the most value?
Mm-hmm. And sometimes an individual curator can, in a particular scenario, do better than a certain size of branded operator. I mean, that's now proving itself in very mature markets to start with, but we think that it's going to have some traction into secondary markets as well. Well, we've seen it in where these somewhat come out as small chains eventually of 2 hotels, 3 hotels, etc., and they deliver value. But that's is that the beginning of a trend, or are these always to remain as one-offs? Is the question. Carlton, what do you think?
So I actually, you'd expect me to say this considering my chosen vocation, but I see the trend going the other way. I see the trend being more independent owners coming to us or groups like us at this table and looking for ways to expand their universe of technological options with guests entering their system, and of course increase their RevPARs. And in some cases, owners are looking to save costs, and they come to groups like us. So I think I would be a hypocrite if I said that there were not hotel owners and specific hotels that do not benefit from groups like us.
Of course there is. Sure.
That exists for sure. But I feel the trend going the other way with more groups coming to us who have independent hotels or owner-operators seeking options.
And that's typically a technology plug-in and know-how transfer and some sort of a hand-holding scenario?
We do. So with sort of big groups like Host, we tend to do more hard brand. In fact, I don't think we've done a soft brand with you. But
we have in these States.
Okay, so it's a little bit outside my scope. But so it's typically in Europe, it's owner-operators, groups that have owned their hotels for a long time, operate themselves, but feel like they need a broader universe of, in addition to the technological aspect, just customers coming to them, and that's why they come to us.
So it's basically driving business into the door. I mean, that's what the main motivation is?
That's why they make the first contact. They end up finding out that they can also save some costs in the process, which helps sort of seal the deal, I think, sometimes.
So are these like autograph collection and your potentially future tribute collection, etc.? Are these a typical solution for that kind of a need?
Within our portfolio, that is the solution for those groups.
How about in the IHG world? I mean, do you see a demand to sort of tap in a creative platform to the system or to the know-how base or customer base, rather than just saying, here, sign a management contract and let me leave it with you?
Yeah, maybe if I just pick up on your previous point first. So, I mean, you described sort of trends in the market around, the innovation of new guest propositions, new brands, small chains kind of emerging and popping up, and honestly, that has been the history of the hotel industry. No brand represented at this table or at this conference started from anything other than anything other than one individual hotel. So that's always been the case. The reality is, certainly the data that I've seen, and it's very much consistent with you, is over the last 5 years, the entirety of the net rooms growth in Europe has come from branded chains. So, when you count new build hotels, rebranding, repurposing of buildings, all the ins and outs, the entirety of the growth in Europe is coming through branded chains. Now, how those branded chains are growing is a little bit different. So, essentially, what I think about your second question is, it's almost like a supply-led question. It's almost like saying we've got hotels out there with a kind of a commercial need, and other platforms, are there opportunities to support those brands. Typically and historically, and I certainly would never say never in terms of your question for IHG, but historically we've taken much more of a demand-led lens, much more of a lens which says, what are the needs out there, the emerging and evolving needs in the market, and how can we create a guest experience that we can deliver that's not necessarily exactly the same every time. We talked about that with Boutique, with our Hotel Indigo and Kimpton brands a few minutes ago, but that's meeting that guest need where we see that evolving and trying to create a proposition to owners that's designed around delivering to that guest need for guests versus something which is solely about the kind of the commercial proposition, the loyalty, the sales teams, all the platforms that sit behind that, which are also very much part of what we do, but have not historically been our kind of route to thinking about new propositions.
But you've been generally slightly more conservative in terms of launching the collections and sort of a soft branding elements compared to some of your competitors.
Yeah, as I say,
Was it deliberate or?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, our approach has been to take a demand-led lens, to think about guest needs, to think about segments of demand, how they're evolving, and to think about whether or not we have emerging gaps in our brand portfolio as defined by a guest need.
Right. Olivier, I know you may have a slightly different slant in terms of the consumer trends, basically. How does individuality and people's demand of individuality and curated to-market type of properties meet with traditional chains, in your opinion?
Well, this is maybe the main difference I have with what Carlton and Matt said at the beginning.
I want differences, yes.
Yeah, we see a difference because whatever the market we're in, it's maybe a little bit different in the upscale market where we see those new collections, and we introduced our own collection also early last year to be able to work in this market. But whatever the market we're in, whether it's upscale, whether it's mid-scale, or even the economy segment, we see a growing trend where consumers are looking for they're looking for a personalized experience. They want to be part of the regions they are or the locations they're staying in. So we see a growing demand for those consumers to be able to have a different property or different design of the property from one place to another. But they also need to be reinsured with the level of services or the level of standards they're going to be able to find in those properties. So this is maybe the main difference we have. And this is why also we've been evolving like that at Best Western for those 70 years we've been in the market, with allowing our properties to be very different from one to another, but securing the consumers with standards and safety procedures to make sure that the hotels would be able to deliver a real experience, whether it's about guest satisfaction or about the global design of the property. So there's a growing trend in this, and this is why we see our development pipeline getting stronger and stronger, because we do over this kind of the best of those two scenarios with those standards from one piece, and this opportunity to offer the consumer an experience which is different one hotel to another.
And your business model in the early days was not typically aimed at new builds. I mean, typically it was people joining with their independent hotels, etc. How much has that shifted towards new builds? I mean, people come to you right at the outset when they're...
Yeah, historically it was non-branded hotels or branded hotels with other companies joining us. And as the market evolved, we're also evolving at the same time as the market, and there's more and more constructions depending on the areas where we're in. And so we've built some new products also to be able to get into this market. And when we look at our development pipeline, we look at the US or in Asia, whatever the segment or the descriptors those hotels are joining us for, we are working more and more with constructions. We've even been able to develop new programs like Vibe or Glow, which are products that we can give to owners or investors, and they can build from scratch those properties. So it's part of our new offerings, part of us joining this market and opening our eyes also to this shift in the marketplace.
Carmen, if you didn't have any taxation considerations at all, and you had the complete freedom in terms of how to own hotels or build hotels, would there be any option to think of self-managed or creating some sort of a curated piece that actually manages itself and then collaborate with one of the bigger platforms in a creative way?
So the answer is it depends. I think we have been in this business long enough to know that you need to have local expertise, and you have to have people on the ground to be able to deliver a certain experience effectively. And therefore, when we look at any particular investment opportunity, we look across the spectrum to figure out which can deliver and offer us the highest value. More often than not, when you look across Europe, our conclusion is that outside of the UK, because the UK tends to be just a much deeper market, more international, and perhaps outside of the key gateway cities in Europe, it's hard to justify not going with a local operator.
Right.
And then when you're talking about a curated experience versus brand managed, it really depends on the box. If you're talking about a ginormous hotel where you're dealing with mostly group business, then I think we want to have a large international affiliation across the top of the property. But if we're talking about a boutique hotel, small, 100-room or less, where you can have more of a lifestyle experience or really classic historical experience, then it becomes a quirky experience, a grungy experience, whatever it is. Then having a brand across the top of the property is probably not the right thing to do.
Right. And Carlton, in terms of your responding to individualizing experiences and localizing experiences, what kind of shifts did you have to do in the development process in order to make sure that it was no longer a cut and paste operation?
Sure, maybe two shifts, I'd say, one architectural and one sort of business deal related. On the architectural side, we at Marriott have been very good at prescribing what hotel owners should do to have a successful hotel, the ginormous hotels that Carmen just mentioned. So we've been very good at that. We had a tough time, I think, institutionally as a company, and certainly our leadership team in Europe, getting to the point where we could say, this hotel is great. It delivers a fantastic customer proposition. It delivers on the promise that a brand company like ours would make. And we can accept it as is, maybe with some technological changes to make sure the interface can work with ours. And so that took us a while to do. That was uncomfortable for us. But I think that we've gotten to the point where we can now see a hotel and we can say, this is a fantastic hotel. Let's include it in one of our soft brands. So I think that was probably the first answer to your question. And the second is around the deal side. When you deal with a very good negotiator like a host, the negotiations take a certain form, and it's based on history and sort of negotiation skills. When you deal with individual owners of assets, they have a different expectation, and they're very cautious about entering into a relationship with a big brand company. And so we needed to change our deal approach. And so typically, what you'd see is, for instance, in our case, shorter terms for those soft brands to give the owners more comfort that if it didn't work, it turns out that the proposition does work. If it didn't work, that they could leave the contract earlier than the typical 300 years that we typically ask for.
Right. And that we negotiate them down.
300 years.
And we negotiate them down to 200 years.
But that's our starting point.
Exactly. What shifts do you see in your approach to development, either deal or physical development? At the outset to individualize the experience, and can you really? Is the question.
Yeah, I think, let's just look at it a bit differently. Historically, we've always localized our guest experience through our brands. So particularly when you have a portfolio of brands as we do at IHG, which is more focused on the mid-scale, a much higher proportion of our guests are domestic. So if you have a Holiday Inn here in Berlin, most of the guests are going to be German versus maybe a more upscale brand where you've got more international flows. And when you have a business like that, which is built on building domestic scale, building demand amongst domestic population of customers, then you have to take the physical design of the hotel, to some extent the service styles, certainly things like food and beverage, and you have to localize them for your market. So we've always had, as a company and as a brand or a collection of brands, a more decentralized philosophy around localizing and optimizing the local market. I think what you're talking about is even the next level beyond that, which is, I think, an emerging a growing segment of guest needs, which is, again, I call it the boutique space. It's around wanting completely different guest experiences at different properties, and we've talked a bit about that. But there's also even another one beyond that, which is not just that each hotel should be different, but that guest experience should differ by the individual. And that's where personalization comes in. And that's where things like loyalty programs enabled by huge technology changes are enabling us to personalize, of course, the on-property experience. One of the things with the Kimpton loyalty program, Karma, is all sorts of differentiated on-property experiences, but also different propositions, promotions to guests, and different ways to recognize our guests on an individual basis across all of our brands. So these themes kind of transcend not just the boutique space or a section of hotels which may have historically been independent, now been affiliated, but across all hotels. You need to get them right for the market, get them right for the guest.
There's a question that, given the greater need of personalization and curation, and given, on the other hand, the speed of development that some of you guys are after in the bigger chains, it's a serious speed of development. The question arises whether in the development of one individual is building or one investor is building a $100 million property, and that's his life at that moment in time, whereas a chain is typically developing 60, 70, 80 at any given time. Is there really the talent and authority on the table at the design and development stage to really curate? Is there really enough seniority? Is there really enough talent to actually at the same time concurrently develop 60 hotels on behalf of a brand, to individualize, take kind of sharp decisions, take quite local decisions that's quite unorthodox along the way, etc., within your organizations?
Well, maybe I'll pick up that one if you don't mind. Honestly, anytime we have an owner spending $100 million on a property, it's not just his life on the line, it's also mine, believe me. But
how does that translate in the contract? I don't remember that clause, really.
I can see my boss at the back of the room. Believe me, it translates.
Yeah, wait, she'll give you a lot of
exactly.
hassle, but I don't know
the point I'm making is, so take Kimpton. The process we have there is we don't design every hotel in-house. What we do is we come up with the design philosophy. We come up with the positioning in the market based on that local market, based on the competitive needs that are there, based on the guest needs that are there. And we have external design agencies that we work with the owner on both call it the hotel side of the business and also the restaurants and bar side of the business. So we're not taking kind of a team of 25 designers internally and stretching them across 60 consecutive projects. What we're doing is we're taking a core of incredible kind of design and creative talent and then extending that across local agencies who really understand and know these individual markets and to bring this brand to life in very different ways that's very unique to each market.
Right. Carl, in your process, the same question in terms of having the right talent and authority on the design and development table.
So in short, the answer is yes. I mean, my experience has been working with our global design folks is that they take a different approach based on how sort of prescriptive the brand is. On the more creative brands in our portfolio, brands like Autograph or Renaissance, they tend to rely more on the owners than they otherwise would because those brands are supposed to be localized based on the environments they're in. And so that's where I think that my perception is that they work more closely with owners to be able to unlock the owner's experience as well as overlaying our experience managing over 4,000 hotels around the world to sort of come up with the best of both solutions.
So, okay, it's more of an overseeing and a hand-holding operation and allowing a lot of the local, or it doesn't have to be local talent, but locally concentrated talent or locally focused talent to basically get on with it with the owner.
That's a fair
So it's a collaborative. Do you develop or do you just acquire? I mean, do you have, lately I'm talking about, is there any greenfield approaches?
No greenfield approaches, but we have undertaken some massive repositionings, including closure of hotels to implement that. But one thing I'd like to note that from our perspective, being on the investor side, one thing that we have seen across our branded and non-branded hotels is that the individual guest room is becoming less and less important, if you will, in terms of design. It's becoming more homogeneous across various brands. And the focus tends to be much more in the public areas. How do you differentiate yourself? Because that's where, for a guest, that's where the social interaction happens. And, I would say, by show of hands in the room, how many people in this room can say that the hotels they stay at offer a better room than your own bedroom? Okay, very few, very few.
I've got a 1-month-old baby in my bedroom, so believe me, any hotel offers a better guest experience than that.
But not if you had to sleep in the same bedroom with your one-month-old baby,
no,
right? Same hotel room, right? So for the most part, it's really guests are now going to hotels because they have the public areas and they want to experience something special, and you're not really going to get into in your hotel room. Because, most people have the flat-screen TVs and a comfortable bed and a nice shower at home already. And that's where we've noticed where the focus is on design and differentiation. It's really more around the public areas. Obviously, you need to have the essentials. You have to have a good bed, a good shower. But we're seeing the risk is really to the brands. How do you differentiate yourself? It's not really going to be in the rooms. Yep. So it's going to be through public areas, the total amenities package,
and that's
and
totally
the service.
Heterogeneous. I mean, there's no formula for them. So
Yes.
Again, whether it's a risk or an opportunity, I think that's absolutely true. If you take another one of our brands, Holiday Inn, we're in the process now of rolling out what we call the open lobby, which is a transformation of the public areas, which is rooted on exactly that guest insight that you're describing. You think about the way technology has changed how we use public spaces, or the way F&B, propositions like Starbucks have changed public spaces. You think about how you use airport lounges, coffee shops, even how within family homes, families are now recongregating back in kitchens. People are using their own homes differently to how they did a few years ago. And that's absolutely playing out in hotels. People are using public areas, still not talking to each other, obviously, but people are using public areas in a very different way. And so that is absolutely rebalancing the design focus, the investment focus across all chain scales, across all brands, absolutely.
Yeah, and let's jump a little bit onto today's distribution world. Now you have a traditional, somewhat of a traditional technological hub of distribution. That's your main business model. On the other hand, there is a complete resurgence of other tiers of distribution that is occurring, and we see some sort of a tension, I don't know, healthy tension. People even merge against them and everything, or acquire bigger chains against them, etc. But there's a tension occurring between two types of platforms and the consumer booking channels and things like that. Now, there are certain common denominators, there's certain fight, there's certain adaptation to life. Where do you find yourself in that whole thing? I mean, given that that industry we're talking about 1.6, 1.8 billion dollars of R&D budgets per year. None of us in the hotel business are anywhere near that. So, where do you find yourself in that world?
Well, it's a tough world. Well, when you talk about distribution and connectivity, it's a tough world because we're talking about tough negotiations and how we can make the most of it for the owners and for the P&L of the properties. The path we've taken as Best Western was to strengthen our own and direct distribution to make it valuable for the members and to get a strategy where we are trying to find alliances or to work with some of the OTAs out there if we get a good value proposal for the members and for the hotel.
Can you?
Yeah, we can. Yeah, lately we've been able to negotiate way better terms with some of the OTAs over there to make sure that the value out of it for our members would be interesting, whether it's based on lower commission levels or higher placements, but being able to discuss with those guys, making sure that what we are putting into our systems creates more profitability for the properties is very important. And when we look at the tendency of this distribution, where we see that those ODAs, those operators more that were used to be in the leisure market or some in the corporate market are now working together, merging, sharing their inventory or sharing their margins. We need to make sure that in our distribution strategy today, we are able to have those top 5 or top 10 operators to make sure that we offer to the owners or to the operator of the hotels the up-to-date distribution platform where they can whether get the highest number of the biggest volume they can when they need it, or when they need to look at the average rate to make sure that we give them the tools to get the most out of this platform. So distribution is a key, a very important component both for the hotel chains today, but also for the owners. And we're trying to make sure in our negotiation that we get most of those.
You want to say something, Carmen?
So Host is the largest owner of Marriott branded hotels worldwide, and we're the largest owner of Starwood branded hotels worldwide. And I would fully expect, as owner, that once this merger completes, that we will see a direct benefit in their negotiating power against the OTAs in the form of reduced commissions, which flows directly through to our bottom line. That's
Why are you kicking me under the table?
That was actually a contract. You know, an offer and an acceptance, you know. Well, yes, that's the expectation that one of the expectations that was rising amongst investors, that would be one of the results eventually. So, is that really going to? I mean, if you were sitting as in the seat of a Booking.com guy and say, no, that's not going to happen,
So
you know.
I'd like to draw your attention to something. So I think the answer is yes. The short answer
Thanks.
is
Yeah.
yes.
All right. This was a contract. Yes.
But then
Is there anyone from Booking.com in the audience who wants to come up? We could do this live.
I do think this is quite interesting, and I think it's something the industry hasn't quite noticed yet. You know, initially when the OTA started gaining power and groups like Marriott or Intercon were negotiating with them, there was an insistence, I think rightly, on the part of the brand companies to make sure there was no price discrimination favoring the OTAs, to make sure that they couldn't offer through their channels a lower price at our hotel. So, and we all have different names for it, I think, at our different companies. So, and that made a lot of sense. If you watch this space closely, I think you're seeing a shift there, which I think demonstrates the growing power of the brands. And that's controversial, but watch it. I think now you're starting to see brands chip away at that and in some ways be able to offer prices more favorable through their own channels than through the OTA channels themselves. And that has gone sort of quietly through the industry, but that is a major, to me, a major indicator of a power shift between the two. And I think it's a trend that you'll see growing more in the future.
Yeah, and that's mainly through added value, right? I mean, not on the visible rate, but on what comes with the rate mainly.
My expectation is that will change in terms of rate offered mainly to Starwood Rewards members or Merit Rewards members or Intercom Loyalty Program members,
Exactly.
Without additional value.
Right. I see. I mean, through your own loyalty system.
So
I mean,
through
actually,
our own
one of the things that I want to get into is the loyalty. I mean, whether that's going to be one of the most powerful tools or not.
You have a question
Yep,
there?
sure.
Do you see your companies opening up your distribution channels similar to Accor Hotels by offering independents the ability to use the distribution without coming underneath the umbrella of the
Off an autograph or something. I mean, it's a plug and play.
Sure. Do you guys want to go first? But our answer is no. We don't foresee that at all.
No, as I said earlier, no plans for anything like that. At present, our strategy is based around understanding guest needs and delivering those needs. It's not about monetizing our commercial proposition. That's there to support the owners of our hotels who deliver against those needs for our guests.
Now that it started, let's take a quick breather. Any other sort of questions? Anybody wants to sort of change the direction? Yes, Mary?
I have a question on names of soft brands. They're getting increasingly difficult to remember. Or perhaps I'm getting a little bit old. How important is the name of a soft brand, both to the owner and to the consumer?
That's a very good question, Mary. How important is it? You know, does it need to be there? Is even a question, right? Yeah. Let's start with you. We don't have a soft brand, though, sorry.
Well, can I answer the question in the context of the brands I have? Because we don't have a soft brand, as it were. But again, take Kimpton. Each of our Kimpton hotels has its own name. Part of the guest experience is about immersing people in very different on-property experiences. And in fact, in recent years, we've pulled back on any Kimpton branding that kind of appears in collateral on property. That said, at the same time, we've upweighted Kimpton's presence through merchandising, through our distribution channels and so on. So essentially, you're leveraging, the brand awareness people have for this is the brand, this is the promise, this is what I can expect when I get there. But the experience which they're looking for, which is unique and differentiated by hotel, is immersive. And part of that is the name of the hotels are all unique to the property.
Okay, Matt, if I could interrupt there. Within Kimpton, which actually is a very strong name and has a really good following in the States, it has had for years, there are separate brands within that, Palomar, Monaco, for instance. So that adds to the confusion. How strongly are you going to be pushing these as brands? If you like one Palomar, then you'll like another Palomar. Don't necessarily go to a Monaco.
Yeah, and that's been a little bit organic in terms of owners going, that's just tremendous. I want to take some of the elements of that into my property. So there's absolutely these two sort of emerging themes within the overall Kimpton brand. Here in Europe, we're just going to be using the strategy I outlined. So the Kimpton brand, that promise of a fantastic differentiated experience than individual hotel brands that live and breathe within that.
Okay, I'm not turning this into a one-to-one.
No, it's fine.
And I promise to stop. But surely this is indigo too, because all your indigos are separate and unique. All the ones I've been in are unique, one from the other.
No, I appreciate the advertising across our brand portfolio. If you guys can just leave us to it, I'm just going to keep going through. So Hotel Indigo absolutely is also a boutique proposition. It differs quite meaningfully from both an owner proposition perspective and a guest proposition perspective. It differs in terms of kind of the level of premium in the market. Kimpton is very much a luxury proposition. Hotel Indigo, more of an upscale, upper upscale. It differs in terms of locations. Kimpton's all about AAA place-to-be locations. Hotel Indigo is more about the neighbourhood stories. It differs in terms of physical design, where Kimpton is genuinely unique property by property. Hotel Indigo has design cues that follow across the portfolio. It differs in terms of service. Kimpton has full F&B, destination restaurants, big meeting space. Hotel Indigo, a more limited proposition, and it differs in terms of our support model for owners, where with Kimpton we manage all of the hotels. With Hotel Indigo it's more of a mix of managed and franchise. So we've got some very clear blue water between those two brands, but they both absolutely meet this emerging and growing guest need for boutique experiences.
That's all you get, Mary, sorry. Let's get to white label for a minute. I'll start with you, Olivier. You're seeing from your side owner-operated, white label managed, even small chain managed hotels. Where do you see the dynamics with white label in terms of what it is, and is there a strong trend in their increase throughout the footprint, specializations? Where do you see them? And do you see that it has a significance in the future of how to manage hotels?
Well, there's a trend. There's a growing trend we see on our territory. It's difficult to say whether it's going to, how far it's going to go, and how the market is going to be able to evolve with it. But we do see a trend where there's a growing need there, and I guess it's there to stay and there to develop. So it should be developing and getting stronger and stronger.
Carmen, how about you in terms of looking at properties which have a white label and a brand, and a known brand and a white label combination, for example, or a self-branded and a white label, whatever?
Well,
are you getting more confident in them?
Oh, definitely. I mean, we see franchising as probably the dominant model for growth in Europe. There's a lot of catching up to do in this part of the world versus the US. I think the brands have also acknowledged that by becoming much more open and flexible with allowing white label operators to operate under their core brands as well as soft brands. And it goes back to the point of who is best suited in the market to operate your hotel efficiently and effectively and drive the best bottom line for you. And I think that the combination of a white label operator with a brand on top of it for the right type of boxes can be a really powerful combination.
Indeed, yeah. And I mean, you're seeing that as well.
Yeah,
you're reacting very well to that market.
I think so. In fact, I might go beyond that. So when you look at the deals that Marriott did last year in Europe, we did, say, 60-some-odd deals, and I think 50-some of them were some form of franchise, so most of them with white label operators, I would say. The second thing, we've not only realized that we need them, we need to make them stronger. Carmen alluded to the fact that Europe is a little bit behind in I think, the franchise evolution than, say, the States. we view our task as not only allowing white label operators to operate under our flags, but to enable them to find creative ways to credit enhancement them, to make them stronger so that they become bigger operators and we get more flags across Europe.
Right. So basically supporting that arena. That's a faster
Encouraging it.
growth for you, obviously.
Without question.
Just a repeat question, really. Same. I mean, what's your experience in and your strategy in developing relationships and strengthening the white label platforms?
Yeah, well, I think in terms of franchising, in Europe, IHG was kind of the first mover. It's always been our dominant business model. Continue to have maybe 80% of our hotel pipeline is franchise versus company managed. Where we manage, it tends to be more upscale luxury brands or more emerging markets where the owner need is just a little bit different. But in Western Europe, particularly with our mainstream brands, we're predominantly franchised, and we have kind of organisationally and in terms of our owners associations some quite strong kind of USPs and heritage in that space.
Right. And we see, by the way, I mean, self-advertising, we were the first pioneering in 31 years ago to start that in Europe, across the Atlantic, because that didn't even exist in Europe at that time, white label. It was all independents, basically. And we're now seeing specializations within that. Just want to be in the boutique space or in the lifestyle segment or in the ultra deluxe segment, or no, I will do mainstream or whatever it is. And a very strong emergence. But from the perspective of the investors, sometimes the question arises, I don't get it, we're going to pay franchise fees to someone, and we're going to pay management fees to another. And when you add the two together, it actually, on paper, looks much more than you would pay as a complete package management contract with the brand, on the other hand. Now,
welcome to my world.
It is, yeah, I know. It sounds like that, but there are various arguments, the bottom line results that prove that two fees or two sets of fees actually play for you as an owner and in terms of net returns. We've seen that in many cases, probably by a much more hands-on, much more focused approach on cost and expense elements, perhaps more than revenue development or business development. But that's another session as to how to juggle those two sets of fees into a benefit to the owner, because it sounds like a threatening scenario. But I want to change the pace a little bit again, back to the consumer and the power of loyalty programs, and whether the consumers of tomorrow, within the next decade or so, are going to be as responsive to loyalty programs as traditionally were, or loyalty programs need to change in their shape, form, and delivery in order to capture the new generations. Let's start with you.
Yeah. Well, loyalty programs clearly have a huge role to play in the industry. I mean, I only have IHG's data for this, but IHG Rewards Club has now 92 million members. Last year here in Europe, our rate of new member enrollments increased by 1/3. So there's still something very, very relevant about loyalty programs. I think some of what's changing is about how we meet the evolving needs of our most frequent travelers. So moving from, historically more of a kind of a reward program, you stay, you get points, to more of a recognition program in terms of personalizing experiences, personalizing the rewards, really recognizing individual travelers. So using technology and service as a real way to distinguish and differentiate the program. I think at the other end of the spectrum, though, loyalty programs, and this builds a little bit on what you were saying a few minutes ago, loyalty programs are evolving because it's becoming the way in which guests interact with the hotel. So take, a lot of people in this room will have an Apple device, an iPhone, an iPad, a Mac. If you have a device like that, you're a member of iTunes, right? It's simply just how you interact with the device, how you connect with multiple devices, how you purchase Apple products. It's just sort of part of the journey you go on. And I think increasingly loyalty will be integrated with that sort of digital guest experience, that digital ecosystem, both before and during the stay, whether that's through preferential rates, whether that's through value-added benefits on property. I think loyalty will evolve, even for non-frequent travelers, to just be a fundamental part of the way they engage with hotels.
So I mean,
It's a big sell.
so I personally do. You know, our numbers are. I think we've got 54 million Merit Rewards customers and probably 20-ish Starwood SPG members. So, but you know, we're looking to a crystal ball because your question was what's going to happen to loyalty in the future. You know, my personal predictions is that we'll continue to grow in part by what companies like ours are doing to enhance that growth. And it ties in a little bit to the question around OTAs a second ago. You know, probably everyone on the stage up here is not allowing you to accrue your loyalty points if you book through an OTA. However, you can do it if you book through a Marriott sponsored channel. And so we're trying to push that business towards the loyalty programs, enhancing that trend ourselves, and trying to build that loyalty that way. So I would see it continue to grow.
What do you think, Carol? Is that a big differentiator from a selection process of where I'm going to sleep tonight?
Well, first of all, I always smile when a brand comes to me with a pitch on a particular hotel and tell me their total SPG or Marriott Rewards or Intercontinental Rewards membership, because that really means very little to me when I'm focused on a particular hotel. And what brand do I want to put on that hotel? Well, the 54 million. Is it 54 million?
That's right.
Yeah.
Actually, it's growing. It's probably 55 now. Yeah.
You know, that will likely mean something very different depending on what the proposition is. Mm-hmm. It's certainly not going to be 54 million coming to my hotel. Right. So that's point number one. I think that the brands will need to be very creative over the next 5 years with what they do with their loyalty programs. Yeah. We're still playing catch up to both the OTAs and Airbnb. In terms of technology, one on the OTA front, you know, yes, loyalty programs are great, and driving direct bookings on your own website is great. But first, your first step has to be how do you get your guests to go to your website to begin with, rather than going to a booking.com. Right. Because it's so easy just to type in, if you're used to it, and have had a good experience booking through Booking, then you just type in Booking whatever. So that they need to be much more creative about really leveraging their loyalty programs.
And can that be enhanced without talking to thousands of owners like you to say that, hey, listen, remember the centralized services charges that actually feed into our loyalty system? We need to notch it up by 1%. You're not going to be jumping on it.
No, preferably without an increased cost to the owner, obviously.
Okay. You're going to be very, very, very creative, I see.
Creative and cost efficient. Yeah. The other couple of points, convenience. How does your loyalty program translate into increased consumer convenience? So when you travel, nowadays everything needs to be convenient. I want my device to be synced up to my room, to my flat screen TV. I want to be able to control my temperature in the room even before I get there. Some people like to use their device to open the door. Some people hate it. So you need to figure out how to create that convenience for the guest. And lastly, to Matt's point, I think as an industry, we need to learn from others as to how we can use that loyalty program to start profiling the consumers. Because that is the key to figure out what your customers want and keep them loyal to you. If you can start profiling them, and I know because I get profiled every month by Google. I use Google everything, and it knows more about me than I know about myself. It's quite scary, but that's the power of technology. So how do you translate that into your loyalty programs?
Yeah. Questions, please. Yes. Yeah, because we have just a few minutes. Go right ahead. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Lina. I am from Jordan. We are hotel owners, and we have a few international brands within our portfolio. We keep on talking about localization, and there is very little that we see in Jordan. We see plans coming from overseas where very little market intelligence or any studies to study the local market or the guest that comes to our properties. Yet we are paying chain fees, marketing fees, and all of that. It seems there is a one-size-fits-all approach from big brands that does not translate on the grounds for local operations. Even though it is branded as international, it is actually it's branded even the core brand, but there is very little attention given to market intelligence and to understanding the local markets. We get concierge services coming from headquarters to us, which means, as you said, means very little. I mean, they are exciting, they are interesting, but they're really not relevant to the local market where the chains are available. So how do you go about that? I mean, how do you go about really localizing by going to the property itself and looking around the market and how that market could be capitalized and exposed the way the guest wants to experience it or the way the guest wants to see it? Thank you.
Okay. It's sort of reluctantly, I have to do some self-serving statements here, you know. But Carthen, you can back me up on that. The solution is to have an interface, basically. I mean, that's what we do for you. To basically sit there and act as an intermediary at first, analyze the local needs, focus on the local needs, analyze the culture, analyze the competition, analyze the current times of that location, and then curate the property hand in hand with the operator to fit that location. So that's a totally different skill set, and that was as one of my questions earlier on in the panel, as you remember, with such speed, how can you actually individualize each hotel? But you can back me up on that. That would be a very big added value if there was a development function that knew how to do that hand in hand with the operator, rather than totally rely on every step of the development.
You were a gracious host up here, so I can do nothing but back you up.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, but she needs an answer from you.
Well, you know, I actually perceived that you were looking at Matt when you were asking those questions. I hope your hotel's
she was looking here. I saw.
I don't even want to know what brands you operate. Hopefully Hilton. I just refer back to my previous answer, which is to say that I think the degree of localization does vary a little bit. It varies by chain scale, so more upscale brands or locations which have more international flows probably can have a higher degree of kind of, let's call it global commercial support and global kind of travel flows that sit behind supporting and driving the business there. I think when you get into either a more mainstream kind of segment of the market, which needs more domestic demand, or you get into particularly more of the boutique space, which requires personalization, you require localization. I mean, I don't know your exact situation, but you know, fundamentally, that's what all brands should be trying to do.
Yeah. We need, unfortunately, running out of time. I'd like to have very quick last words on looking at life from an investor's perspective, a hotel investor's perspective, about the choices of how to go about it in terms of bringing in the brand, the development, the distribution channel, the operation, etc. Just quick snapshot, perhaps looking forward in the next 10 years.
Well, if we look at the next 10 years, I mean, if we look at the distribution landscape, it's getting more and more complex. And the way the consumer's behavior is evolving too, which the choice they have in selecting hotels. Part of our work as a brand is to make sure that we stay very relevant, and all the work we're doing is trying to understand how the market is evolving and how our brands are evolving too. We were talking about the loyalty program just earlier, and the work which we are all putting into those loyalty program to make them successful is how do we create added value for the consumers to be relevant in the eyes of our owners. What I know is that the brand's going to stay more and more and will need to be more and more relevant in the futures because of the power they bring to the owners. So I do believe that we are there to stay. I mean, and the impact that the brand's going to have on the properties are going to be more and more important in the future.
Okay.
I fully agree with Olivier. I think that the industry is going to evolve much faster than we've seen in the last 10 years over the next 10 years. And I'm not wise enough to be able to figure out which brands, plural, will survive, which operators will survive. But it's going to be a race to the finish, and it's going to be a situation of survival of the fittest. And maybe that has to do with scale. Maybe that has to do with differentiation, service, all of the above. But I'd love a crystal ball to be able to tell me that, but I don't know. hence, we're going to, at this point in time as owners, we are trying to make ourselves as immune as possible and really focusing on investing in properties that we have expertise with and can add value it, and doing what we do best, rather than trying to be everything to everyone, because there's a risk to doing that.
Right.
So maybe I'll give some unsolicited advice to the future hotel owners out there. So brands, I think, are going to continue to grow. Obviously, the advice I would give you is pick a brand that you like that will be financially successful for your hotel. But because brands do change and come and go, also think about the culture of the company whom you'd select to work with you, because I think that culture will be more enduring than the brands themselves, and that would be the piece of advice I'd give you.
Yeah, I just think this is a really cool industry to be in at the moment. The pace of kind of technology change, which is both creating this huge need for scale, but also this huge ability to drive personalization of experience, is affecting our industry at least as much as it's affecting any other. But it's far more sort of holistic and fundamental than that, the change which is happening about our guests becoming more sophisticated, hotel service, hotel design becoming more sophisticated. It's just an incredibly exciting time to be in the industry. So I think all of us, all of the big brand chains, are building as much capability as we can to deliver in as strong and as personalized and as localized a way as we possibly can to kind of meet these trends. And it's just an exciting time for owners, for branders, for operators. I think the next few years are going to be very, very interesting. I agree with you.
My closing remarks would be that I've learned. The title of the session was this versus that, or something like that. But I think there's no versus here. I think these functions, whether it is white label, owner-operated brands, soft brands, plug-and-play brands, sharing technology with big brands or big chain systems, they're all to stay in certain forms and shapes. I think the investor's attitude here needs to be very careful in analyzing which exact format to go with for a particular case. And there is no single answer to every type of hotel investment proposition that, oh, this definitely needs to be that formula or that definitely needs to be this formula, but definitely need to be creative, definitely need to be carefully assessed for case-by-case basis, because all these tools are now very valid. Whereas perhaps a few years ago, maybe a decade ago, they were not. Some formulas were all-encompassing. Some formulas were the go-to formulas. Is it franchise or management contract, full stop, and that was the end of that. Now there's a whole array, and therefore there's a whole step. One little advice to all of us here, actually, from my perspective, is that with the obsession of technology, distribution, OTAs, the parallel systems, and all that scale discussions to manage that situation should not take us away from the core product. And we're seeing a lot of leadership time. We're seeing a lot of intellectual time spent on this, which is rightly so. Just cautioning against the dangers of forgetting that actually we need to have a hotel that performs as a hotel and satisfy the guest and understand, predict, know the guest, and deliver a real hospitality product at the end of the day. So these two things it's not like either technology or comfort. Let's not forget the actual core product. Thank you very much for attending, and thank you very, very much for the very valuable panelists and inputs.